Welcome to the enlightening world of the Four Noble Truths, meticulously prepared by Thanissaro Bhikkhu, also known as Jeffrey Degraff. This profound exploration of Buddha's teachings is now available in audiobook form, courtesy of the Buddhist Audio Bookshelf YouTube channel. Dive into the essence of these timeless truths, gaining insights into the nature of suffering, its origins, cessation, and the path to liberation. As you embark on this transformative journey, we invite you to play a crucial role in spreading the wisdom of the Buddha. Share, like, and subscribe to the content, allowing the ripple effect of these teachings to reach a wider audience. Let us collectively contribute to the dissemination of profound insights and foster a community dedicated to the pursuit of inner peace and understanding. Together, we can illuminate the path to enlightenment for seekers around the globe. Let's start with the introduction. On at least 2 occasions, the Buddha said that all he taught was dukkha and the ending of dukkha. This means that if you want to understand his teachings, dukkha is a good word to know. Its primary meaning is simple enough: pain, but it covers all levels of pain, from acute physical suffering and mental anguish to subtle levels of stress in very refined, even blissful, states of mind. Unfortunately, there's no single English word that can encompass all these levels of intensity. Fortunately, though, the fact that we have separate words for pain, suffering, and stress helps to clear up some of the difficulties that the Buddha faced, given that his language had only one word to cover all these things. In the course of this book, I will usually translate dukkha as suffering, but occasionally I'll use pain or stress where they seem to fit better into the context. The main point to remember, though, is that dukkha is the primary focus of everything the Buddha taught. If you're interested in solving the problem of suffering, then his dharma, or teaching, is where to look. If you're interested in other issues, you can look somewhere else. In his first talk, the Buddha taught that the path to the end of suffering started with right view concerning 4 noble truths: suffering, its origination, its cessation, and the path to its cessation. Here, too, it's good to look at the words the Buddha used for truth and noble: Sakha and Ariya. The early Buddhist texts define Sakha as whatever is undeceptive and doesn't turn out to be other than what it seems. The way the texts use this word shows that a truth can mean either 1. A fact as a reality in and of itself, or 2. An accurate statement about that reality. This double meaning is important to keep in mind for 2 reasons. The first is that it's directly related to the solution of the problem of suffering. In the search for an end to suffering, you're looking for accurate statements that describe how to reach the reality of suffering's end. The second reason is that the Buddha made statements about truth that sometimes seem contradictory if you assume that truth can be only a reality or only a statement. But once you realize that the word has these 2 meanings, the seeming contradictions disappear. And not only that, understanding the Buddha's insight into the relationship between pain as a reality and the words inspired by that reality helps you understand how best to make use of the 4 truths in practice. The Buddha called these truths Ariya, noble, for at least 4 reasons. The first is that they inform a path of practice that leads not just to the temporary ending of individual pains, but to a deathless dimension where all pain and suffering is transcended for good. Only a search that seeks the deathless, he said, can be rightly called noble. Any search aimed at a lesser happiness was, in his eyes, not noble at all, because that lesser happiness would inevitably lead to disappointment. The noble truths are noble because they show the way to the noblest of goals: a happiness that would never disappoint. The second way in which the truths are noble has to do with the fact that the Pali word for noble also means universal. These are truths that apply to all beings everywhere, regardless of gender, race, nationality, or cultural background. They are true even for beings on other levels of the cosmos because they focus on the structure of how suffering is caused in any mind. Because these truths are universal in serving the noblest of goals, they're also noble in the sense that they're preeminent. On the one hand, they're preeminent in the world at large in pointing to the unique way to the best goal possible: deathless happiness. All other truths are subordinate to them in this regard. On the other hand, they're preeminent specifically in their relation to the other truths the Buddha taught. Even though he learned many things in the course of his awakening, he realized that all the lessons with the potential to lead others to awakening were contained within these four truths. So they form the context in which all the other truths he taught have to be understood. An image from the Pali Canon, the earliest extant record of his teachings, states that just as the footprint of the elephant can contain all the footprints of all land animals, the Four Noble Truths contain all skillful teachings. And finally, the truths are noble because they're ennobling. They require you to adopt a noble attitude toward your suffering. To begin with, this means admitting the suffering inherent in the way your mind normally clings and craves. To adopt the truths is to step back from your likes and dislikes, and to acknowledge that they're precisely the things causing you to suffer. At the same time, the truths also ask you to become noble in taking responsibility for ending your sufferings in a way that harms no one. In so doing, they put power in your hands and show you how to use that power responsibly. They open the possibility of finding happiness with true dignity. When the Buddha explained the Four Noble Truths in his first talk, he noted that each truth carried a duty. Suffering was to be comprehended, its origination abandoned, its cessation realized, and the path to its cessation developed. Once he had fully completed these four duties, he stated, he knew that he was fully awakened. He was now released from suffering of every sort. What this means is that the truths are not just interesting facts. They're a call to action. Because the Four Noble Truths form the context for all the Buddha's other teachings, they're like sorting boxes to determine what that call to action means in any given instance. Once you know which box a particular teaching is in, then you know what to do with it. Is it a teaching that helps you comprehend suffering? Or is it one that helps to abandon its cause? Only when you know what to do with a teaching can you reap its full benefits. But even though the Four Noble Truths form the context for understanding and applying all of the Buddha's other teachings, the truths themselves fall into the larger context of his teachings on truth and the normal human response to pain. Once we understand these larger contexts, we can better make use of the Four Noble Truths. In particular, to grasp why the Buddha formulated the truths in the way he did, it's good to know how he understood the mind's normal reaction to pain, both what was normally wrong with that reaction and what was potentially useful toward providing an opening for going beyond pain and suffering altogether. To grasp the role he had in mind for the truths, it also helps to know how he saw the social dimension of telling the truth and learning the truth in the context of the search to find a reality that truly ended the reality of pain. This is the main purpose of this book. To explain the Four Noble Truths, 1, in and of themselves, 2, as the context for understanding the Buddha's other teachings, and 3, in the light of the larger context provided by the Buddha's understanding of the mind's natural response to pain, and how that response shapes the desire for truth. I hope that understanding the words of the Four Noble Truths in this way will provoke insights leading to the deathless reality to which they point. Chapter 1. The Desire for Truth. The search for truths about pain starts with a truth in the form of a reality. The experience of pain itself. As the Buddha explains it, there are two natural responses to this reality, bewilderment and a search. The bewilderment comes from not knowing why the pain is happening. This is especially true for infants experiencing pain, but because the causes for pain can be so complex, unpredictable, and seemingly beyond our control, this bewilderment can last throughout life. The search comes both because we're bewildered and because we desire another reality. We want the pain to stop. It's in the psychological and social space defined by these responses that the Buddha formulates his teachings on truths in general, and on the Four Noble Truths in particular. The social space is defined by relationships. Your relationships with other people, your relationship to the words you use to communicate with those people, the relationship between those words and reality, and the relationships among the realities you want your social interactions to influence. These relations start within the context of a duality. The difference between pain and the cessation of pain. Because this is a duality of realities, the truths that take you to the second reality will have to acknowledge this difference. The cessation of pain differs from pain and is preferable to the pain. Any teaching that denies this duality and the way we evaluate it won't satisfy your desires or needs. Within this duality, the Buddha articulates the search for the cessation of pain in these terms. Who knows a way or two to the cessation of this pain? The way this question is articulated carries many implications. 3 in particular stand out. 1. The fact that we're looking for knowledge from other people brings in the personal dimension of our desire for the truth about pain. We interact with others because we're looking for someone who has a. true knowledge about the reality of ways to end the pain, and b. the compassion to convey that knowledge to us. This is the context in which we begin to look for truth in the form of words. Words that convey genuine knowledge, spoken by a person who truly knows the relevant realities and wants us to know them, too. It's important to note that our desire for personal relationships is strongly shaped by the fact of our suffering. The role of pain and suffering in shaping this desire is so basic and strong that it sometimes makes you wonder. If there were no such thing as pain and suffering, if our experience were already totally blissful, would we be interested in personal relationships at all? For these reasons, truth in this social dimension is a matter of true relationships within 2 further dualities. First, assuming a duality between reality and words, we're looking for a true relationship between the reality of the ending of pain on the one hand, and the words pointing to that reality on the other. The statements about that reality have to correspond to what that reality actually is. It's because of this duality that the Buddha used the word truth with a dual meaning. The truth of the reality, and the truth of the words describing that reality. Second, assuming a duality between ourselves and the people we hope will teach us the way to the reality of the ending of suffering, we want a true personal relationship, in which the person teaching us not only knows true words about the ending of suffering, but also has enough genuine compassion to teach us those words in a way that we can understand them and put them to use. We, in turn, will have to do our best to give the teachings contained in those words a genuine try. Only when a relationship is genuine on both sides like this can it be called true. 2. The fact that we desire the end of the pain is what shapes our attitude toward the words we're taught about pain. We're not interested in true words for their own sake. We want true words that help guide us to the reality we want. In this way, the words have to serve our desires. They prove their truth by genuinely leading us to a reality where those desires are satisfied. 3. The question behind this urge divides reality into 4 parts, based on 2 dualities, one of which we've already noted. The difference between the reality of pain and the reality of the cessation of pain. One side of this duality, pain, is not desired, while the other side, the cessation of pain, is. The other duality relates to the fact when you think of a way that accomplishes an aim, you're assuming 2 types of real events, causes and effects. The way you're looking for is the cause, the end of suffering is the effect. These 2 dualities, taken together, divide reality with regard to the problem of pain into 4 parts. The undesired effect, pain, the unskillful cause leading to the undesired effect, the desired effect, the cessation of pain, and the skillful cause leading to the desired effect. In teaching the 4 Noble Truths, the Buddha takes all these considerations into account. To begin with, it's because of the double duality in the last point that the Noble Truths are 4, rather than 3 or 5. The Buddha offers to teach us these 4 truths in words that correspond to the reality of how pain can be understood and brought to an end, and he promises to be truthful in conveying his knowledge of that reality. He teaches these words, not as ends in themselves, but as means to an end. The reality of the ending of suffering. As we will see, he identified true Dharma as what passes the test in actually bringing that end about. The fact that he devoted his entire teaching to these issues is what makes the Dharma unique and radical in its focus. But even though the question, who knows a way or two to the cessation of this pain, sketches out the basic framework for how the Buddha's teaching on the 4 Noble Truths is supposed to function, still it leaves many issues unclear. The way the Buddha clarified these issues is what makes the Dharma unique and radical in its particulars. If we separate the question into 3 parts, we can see where it's unclear. Who knows a way or two? What kind of way are you looking for? Do you want the other person to take the pain away for you? Or are you willing to do the work yourself? To the cessation. Are you looking for a total ending of all pain? Or will you be content to settle just for the ending of this particular pain? Of this pain? What kind of pain are you talking about? Physical? Mental? Both? In presenting the 4 Noble Truths, the Buddha sharpens these 3 parts of the question, at the same time answering the question as a whole. Let's look at these 3 points in reverse order. We start with the nature of pain and suffering. In the first Noble Truth, the Buddha lists many events that count as suffering. The list starts with a combination of physically and mentally painful events: birth, aging, and death, sorrow, lamentation, physical pain, distress, and despair, association with the unbeloved, separation from the loved, not getting what is wanted. These are all forms of suffering familiar to everyone. But when the Buddha summarizes what all these events have in common and makes them stressful, his analysis doesn't sound familiar at all. The common thread in all these forms of suffering, he says, is the act of clinging to the 5 aggregates of form, feeling, perception, fabrication, and consciousness. We'll discuss the meaning of this summary in Chapter 5, but here it's enough to note that the suffering of clinging is primarily mental. Without clinging, none of the other events in the list, even though they might be physically painful, can cause suffering to the mind. So mental suffering is the Buddha's primary focus when he talks about the ending of suffering. However, he states in the second Noble Truth that the cause of clinging is any craving that leads to further becoming a self-identity in a world of experience. We'll discuss this point in detail in Chapter 6, but here we can simply note that the craving leading to becoming not only leads to mental suffering in the present moment, but can also cause you to act in ways that will lead to both mental suffering and physical suffering in the future. When the mind is freed from craving, it opens to an unconditioned dimension in which there is no birth, aging, or death at all. This means that a fully awakened person, after the death of his or her last body, is freed not only from mental suffering, but also from any and all physical pain. Because this deathless dimension lies outside of space and time, this freedom is total, once and for all. This connects with the second point. People, if asked for their most heartfelt desire around pain, would most likely respond that they'd want total freedom from all pain. That's our most primal desire about pain. We'd never like to experience it ever again. But day-to-day life has led us to believe that that's an unrealistic goal, as we go from one pain to the next and then the next. So we tend to lower our sights, abandoning our primal desire and trying to content ourselves with efforts to end individual pains as they occur. The Buddha, however, felt that life would be worthwhile only if he could hold to the heart's primal desire for a total cessation of pain, and do his best to find it. The main message of his first talk was that he had succeeded in his search. This is the point of his third Noble Truth. The craving that causes suffering can be ended without leaving a trace, which is why the total end of suffering is possible. As for the way to the end of pain and suffering, even though we might prefer that someone else do the work for us, the Buddha found that that was impossible. We suffer because we haven't completed the duties with regard to the 4 Noble Truths, which means that we suffer from our own lack of skill. No one else can make us skillful. Other people, like the Buddha, can point out the way to develop our skill, but we ourselves have to follow that way if we want to stop suffering. This way is described by the 4th Noble Truth. It consists of 3 basic mental skills: virtue, concentration, and discernment, divided into a total of 8 factors. Discernment is divided into the factors of right view and right resolve, virtue into the factors of right speech, right action, and right livelihood, concentration into the factors of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. These factors will be discussed in detail in Chapter 8, but here we can point out 3 important features of this path. A. The factors of the path are all fabricated or assembled from the same 5 aggregates that, when clung to, constitute suffering. Right view, for instance, is composed of perceptions and thought fabrications. The labels the mind applies to things and the thoughts it assembles from those labels. Right concentration makes use of all five aggregates. Also, an important part of right effort is the desire to master skillful action. This means that the path must be used strategically. The factors are developed until they have served their purpose, then they're abandoned along with the cause of suffering. The Buddha's image, which we'll have reason to cite frequently in the course of this book, is that the path is like a raft. You're currently standing on the unsafe shore of a river, while safety lies on the far shore. There's no bridge to the other side, and no boat, no yacht to ferry you across. So you build a raft from the branches and twigs you find on this shore, hold on to it as you swim across the river, and then, when you reach the safety of the far shore, you put it aside to go on your way. A more modern image would be of a load of bricks you're carrying on your shoulders. To suffer is to refuse to put the bricks down. To follow the path is to take the bricks off your shoulders and use them to build a runway. When the runway is done, you can take off and fly. Right view is one of two factors that the Buddha highlights in his discussions of the path. To have right view is to see things in terms of the Four Noble Truths. Because these truths are part of the path, this means that we will have to put them aside when we reach the reality on the other side. This connects to the point we made above, that the Four Noble Truths are true because they work. The technical term is that they're instrumental. They're meant to be used for a certain task aimed at a certain goal, like a carpenter's tools for building furniture, and then put aside when the task is done. Because they act directly or indirectly as guides to action, they contain inherent value judgments as to what's worth knowing for the sake of actions worth doing. The other factor that the Buddha often highlights is right concentration. This factor he compares to food in that it gives you the strength to follow the path. The levels of right concentration are defined by their feeling tone. Levels of rapture are refreshment, pleasure, and equanimity. The fact that these feeling tones can be consciously fostered means that they can provide temporary relief from suffering as you follow the path. The path doesn't save all its rewards for the end. Still, it requires work. Even though the Four Noble Truths respond to your desire for a total end to suffering, they don't pander to your desire that the way there be easy or that it will follow your preconceived notions. This means that you need to be convinced that the path is at least worth a try. As the Buddha notes, the repeated reality of suffering and stress forces you to place conviction in at least some way to end suffering. For you to place that conviction in the Buddha's analysis of suffering and the way to its end, you need to develop conviction in the person teaching the way and in the words explaining the way itself, to the point where you're willing to give the way a genuine try. These three issues define the social dimension of the Four Noble Truths. In the next 9 chapters, we'll discuss how the Dharma analyses these three issues, with the aim of arriving at the reality beyond a social dimension, where the desire for the end of suffering is fully met. Chapter 2. A True Teacher. Before the Buddha gave his first talk, he had to establish the right relationship with his audience, a group of 5 monks. He needed to convince them of the possibility that he knew what he was talking about, that he would tell them the truth, and that they would benefit from hearing it. In other words, he had to convince them that he was knowledgeable, truthful, and compassionate. The qualities anyone would look for in a teacher offering to give instruction on the way to end suffering. Now, the Buddha already had some history with the 5 monks. They had been his attendants during a 6-year period when he subjected himself to extreme austerities, almost starving himself to death in his search for the deathless. When he realized that if he continued with those austerities he would die without having achieved his goal, he began eating again in moderation. The 5 monks, seeing this, decided that he had given up on his search. Disgusted, they left. As it so happened, the Buddha hadn't given up at all. He had actually gained his first insight into one of the factors of the actual path to the deathless, the practice of right concentration. But with his body so emaciated, he couldn't attain that concentration. That was why he had started eating again. Still, in their eyes, he had slacked off. So, When after gaining awakening he sought them out to teach them, he had to convince them that it would be worth their while to listen to him and follow his instructions. At first, they resisted. When he told them that he was now awakened, that he had attained the deathless, and that he could teach them how they, too, could follow the way to the deathless, they rejected his claims. How could he have found the way to the deathless after slacking off? 3 times he asserted his claims, which, in the culture then, was a sign of his earnestness, but 3 times they rejected them. He then reminded them of what they knew of his truthfulness. Had he ever made a claim like this before? No. So the group of 5 were willing to listen. The Buddha taught them the 4 noble truths, along with the duties appropriate to each, and at the end of the talk, one of the 5 gained his first glimpse of the deathless. The Buddha now had a witness to confirm his claims. Shortly thereafter, he was able to help all 5 to fully attain the goal. This was the first instance of a pattern that was repeated again and again in the first years of the Buddha's teaching career. He had to convince his listeners of his knowledge, his truthfulness, and his compassion. When they could see that he was the kind of teacher they were looking for in their search to end suffering, they were willing to put his teachings into practice and gain the desired results. Either fully awakening to the end of suffering, or gaining a glimpse of the goal, and knowing that eventually they would arrive there. In taking on the role of teacher, the Buddha presented himself as what he called an admirable friend. To listen to him and follow his instructions was to enter into an admirable friendship with him. He later defined this sort of friendship in a way that could apply to other reliable teachers as well. Simply put, you enter into an admirable friendship first by looking for a person whose behavior embodies 4 qualities: conviction, virtue, generosity, and discernment, and who encourages other people to develop those qualities as well. Then you establish a relationship where you try to emulate those qualities in your own behavior, too. This relationship, the Buddha said, was the most important external factor in awakening to the end of suffering. Conviction, here, means conviction in the Buddha's awakening, and particularly in the principle of karma that the Buddha discovered in the course of his awakening. That your experience of pleasure and pain comes from your own actions, either present or past. Virtue means abstaining from 5 forms of harm: killing living beings, stealing, engaging in illicit sex, telling lies, and taking intoxicants. Generosity refers to being generous not only with your material possessions, but also with your time, energy, and knowledge. Discernment means understanding the principles of cause and effect as they can be mastered to put an end to suffering and stress. Of these 4 qualities, conviction and discernment relate to the teacher's knowledge, virtue to the teacher's truthfulness and compassion, and generosity to the teacher's compassion as well. In addition to defining admirable friendship, the Buddha set up a monastic order to train his disciples to be admirable friends to themselves and to others. Around this order, he established a culture of training and apprenticeship that would encourage the practice of admirable friendships to last for many generations. Several aspects of that training were particularly aimed at ensuring that the values of knowledge, truthfulness, and compassion would be fostered in the culture he left behind, a culture that has lasted to the present day. In terms of knowledge, he trained his students in cross-questioning. If there was anything in the teaching they didn't understand, they were encouraged to ask for clarification and to keep asking until they understood well enough to put the teachings into practice. The Buddha contrasted this style of teaching with what he called training in bombast, in which the teacher teaches using flowery and lofty words with no clear meaning, and the students are discouraged from asking what, precisely, those words might mean. Because training in cross-questioning is aimed at the student's understanding, it's also training in compassion. The act of teaching should serve, not the glory or popularity of the teacher, but the student's ability to benefit from it. In terms of truthfulness, the rules by which the Buddhist monks and nuns live encourage them to be truthful in 3 areas. A. To begin with, they should be truthful in observing their own actions. The rules were designed so that if a monk broke a rule, the severity of the offense often depended on the intention behind the act and on the perceptions that informed it. For instance, taking something you perceive to be yours carries no penalty, whereas taking with the intent to steal something you correctly perceive as belonging to someone else can get you permanently evicted from the order. The importance of these mental factors in determining an offense forces the monks to be observant not only of their physical actions, but also of the intentions and perceptions behind their actions. It also sensitizes them to the fact that their perceptions can often be wrong. If they take their training seriously, they have to check their perceptions again and again to make sure they're accurate. This aspect of truthfulness can be called truth in observation. b. When a monk is accused of an offense, he should truthfully report his actions to the monks judging the case. They're instructed not to settle the case until they're convinced that the accused is telling the truth about what he did. This aspect of truthfulness can be called truth in reporting. c. When a monk is accusing another monk of an offense, he should be truthful in citing the basis of the accusation. Is it based on what he saw, what he heard, or only what he suspected? Those judging the case have to make sure that the accuser is not exaggerating the strength of his evidence. This aspect of truthfulness can be called truth in citation. As we'll see in chapters 9, 10, and 11, these three forms of truthfulness play a role, not only socially, within the monastic community, but also internally, in the way you approach the practice. Just as you look for a teacher who's truthful in these three ways, you should be truthful in the same three ways, as you examine the views you bring to the practice, and as you engage in training your mind. In terms of compassion, the monks and nuns are enjoined to teach the Dharma freely, and not to accept payment for a Dharma teaching. The Buddha himself rejected, in very strong terms, any payment for what he taught. This is because the Dharma is best learned when it is treated as a gift. After all, the Dharma emphasizes the virtue of generosity as a feature of admirable friendship, and as a foundation for the practice, and the best way to teach generosity is to be generous with your teaching. It's for this reason that the monks and nuns are required to live off the gifts of others, for two main purposes. 1. They're under no pressure to teach, as their needs are met, so there is no reason for them to use the Dharma as a means of livelihood. 2. Living off the generosity of others, they're encouraged to feel gratitude, and to express that gratitude by practicing well and offering the Dharma with a generous heart. Of course, even in the context of a culture designed to foster the values of knowledge, truthfulness, and compassion, it's possible that not all the monks and nuns have fully absorbed the training. In the Buddha's image, there are those who are like the tongue that immediately knows the taste of the soup, and those who are like the spoon that can sit in the soup forever and never know its taste. This was true in the Buddha's time, and is still true now. Just because a person can claim to be a product of this culture doesn't mean that he or she is qualified to teach. For this reason, the Buddha also laid down standards for potential students to use in judging how well a potential teacher embodies qualities of knowledge, truthfulness, and compassion. This is to help protect you against studying with a spoon. These lessons appear in the larger context of the Buddha's analysis of the steps to be followed in awakening to the truth. Finding a true teacher is the very first step, and the first requirement in that step is to develop the quality of truthfulness in yourself. As the Buddha noted, you can't judge another person's integrity unless you have some integrity of your own. At the same time, you have to be observant, willing to spend time with a teacher, watching his or her behavior, until you're convinced that the teacher is worthy of your trust. This is why the Buddha looked for two qualities in a student. That the student be observant and not deceptive. To be observant means that you watch carefully your own behavior and that of others. You're quick and objective in seeing your own good points and faults, as well as theirs. To be not deceptive means that you report your behavior truthfully to others, without hiding any lapses in terms of your morality. In addition to looking for truthfulness in a teacher, you're also looking for someone who knows what's best for you, and who really has your best interests at heart. The Buddha has no use for the idea that all teachings are just a power play, an effort to bring others under the teacher's control. Admittedly, such teachings do exist in the world, but if a teacher is showing you the correct way to totally end your suffering, how compassionate can you get? It's entirely for your benefit when the teacher, in the Buddha's words, has this attitude toward teaching. That's the purpose of discussion, that's the purpose of counsel, that's the purpose of drawing near, that's the purpose of lending ear. I.e., the liberation of the mind through no clinging. To find a sort of person who would want to see you liberate your mind, the Buddha suggests 3 ways to test a teacher's knowledge, truthfulness, and compassion. Spend time with the teacher who seems knowledgeable, and try to measure the teacher against these 3 questions. 1. For knowledge. Does this person teach truths that would be hard for a person of greed, aversion, and delusion to know? 2. For truthfulness. Does this person have the greed, aversion, or delusion that would inspire him or her to claim knowledge that he or she didn't have? 3. For compassion. Does this person have the greed, aversion, or delusion that would inspire him or her to get another person to do things that would lead to that person's long-term harm or suffering? If the answer to the first of these questions is no, or the answer to either of the other 2 is yes, look for another teacher. If the answer to the first is yes and to the other 2 no, then you can go on to the next steps in awakening to the truth. Develop conviction in the teacher, draw near, and listen to the Dharma that he or she has to teach. As you listen to the Dharma, remember that you will be hearing truths expressed in words, and that those words are meant to be put into practice. Thanks for tuning in. As we wrap up this episode, your support means the world to us. To fuel the growth of our YouTube channel and inspire us to work even harder in spreading the teachings of Buddha, we kindly ask for your likes, shares, and subscriptions. Your engagement serves as the driving force behind our dedication, motivating us to persist in our mission of making Buddha's wisdom accessible to all. So, if you've enjoyed what you've heard, be sure to hit that like button, share our content, and subscribe to stay connected. Together, let's create a community that embraces enlightenment and wisdom. Thank you for being a crucial part of our journey.